Thank you for listening to the Mathetai podcast. Before we start this episode, just a word of warning that this episode may contain issues that are sensitive to certain listeners. If you have younger children, you may want to preview this episode first as we deal with sexual abuse and the effects of that in an individual's life. And if you are a survivor of sexual abuse, this may bring up some emotions and struggles that you might want to be aware of, although we are offering hope and solutions through this episode. So God bless you in that, and we pray that this episode would encourage you and strengthen you as we learn about overcoming these trials and difficulties in our lives. Welcome to the Mathetai podcast. This is our special episode we call From the Deck, where we have special guests and we interview them and talk to them about their life experiences, their experience personally and their experience in ministry, what drove them to Christ in the first place, and how that's affected their adult life, and how that shaped who they are as adults, and then how that shapes their participation in the church. And so today I'm joined by a special friend of mine. He is my former college roommate, so he has put up with me in many a season and with many things. And he has written, it's mutual, I'm sure. He's written a couple of books now telling his story from a fictional standpoint, but with some very powerful insights from his personal experiences and just from a storytelling perspective. On a very important topic today, which we'll get into in just a little bit. But my guest is Harry Estes, and go by Esty.
Yeah.
That's how I know you from college.
And you're more than welcome to call me that. And so throughout this, we can interchange. I'm fine with that.
All right.
So.
All right. Fantastic. Well, we were at Whittier College together, and it was your junior year, my sophomore year, that we roomed together.
My senior
year.
Your
senior year.
My last year.
There you go. So I ended your college career. It's one way to put it, isn't it?
Bad though, but it wasn't bad. It was good.
Well, it wouldn't be the first thing that ended. But yeah, we had a great time rooming together. Great couple of years together at college, and ministering through the Christian club on campus there, and just through experiencing life together for those couple of years. And it's been awesome to see what God's done with you and the family that you have, and you have your wife Chrissy and your 3 boys. And so that's been great to see how the Lord's moved you and directed you over these years. And you're now a high school science teacher.
Yes, and then specifically I'm doing special ed science. So I've narrowed down my focus just a little bit for that particular population.
Okay.
Although, because I have multiple credentials, I can do both special ed and regular science too. So I kind of flip around. In the last 25 years, 26 years, I've been teaching. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And is it chemistry specifically that you're teaching, or are you teaching multiple avenues of science?
Well, in special ed, I'm doing more of biology, physical science, and earth science.
Okay.
So I haven't taught, it's funny because my credential, my degree is biochemistry. My credentials are biology and chemistry, but I've never taught a chemistry class before.
Oh,
so,
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, go figure.
But that's the way it goes.
Yeah. Well, let's jump right into your story. Okay. Now, you grew up in Wyoming in a small town.
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit about that. What was your life like growing up?
Okay. Is it okay if I tell the name of the small town?
Well, it's up to you. Yeah, you're more than welcome to.
Because most people, I mean, there's, at the time there was 5,000 people that lived in my town. So it's Warland, Wyoming, which was kind of in the middle of this river basin. So what that meant is in Wyoming that, there's a bunch of farms, and that's one of the main industries. So where I lived was actually a few miles outside of the main town. So I was in what would be called here a subdivision, I guess. But it was really just about a handful of mobile homes that just kind of were plopped in the middle of some fields. We had corn, sugar beets, and barley. Both the sugar and the barley went for beer because we had a Coors plant. The sugar also went for Pepsi, because we had a Pepsi plant there, which was the next two bigger industries. And then the corn was for whatever. It could be for livestock, whatever. So if you can just imagine a small town, but then even smaller on the outskirts, that's kind of where I grew up. And it's a little different than California in that it's not quite as sandy dusty, but in some ways it is,
Right.
Because it is kind of desert-like, but we have some very, very cold winters and some periods of time where it's really, really hot. And so that environment, I think, does play a huge part in my own experience as a child, and also being sexually abused as a child. Because of my isolation at such a young age from most of my peers who lived in town, there was a lot of stuff I had to kind of figure out on my own. So most of my childhood was spent outside, just kind of exploring by myself. So during the summertime, when there was no school, we had acres and acres of Bureau of Land Management land to go explore, and I would go ahead and set off and do that. My dad was also a motorcycle shop owner, and so we had some motorcycles that I would also use to go ahead and just find places to go and keep myself entertained for hours. And in that I think that's where some of the story part of me began to develop. I thought of, okay, so here I am driving, and I'm out in this deserted land. So what kind of stories can I come up with this? How can I keep my mind also entertained?
Yeah.
So in my head, telling a lot of stories.
So that's where kind of the inspiration for some of these books has come. Your storytelling ability has come from that childhood.
It started there.
Yeah,
definitely.
Being able to weave stories together.
Right. And then just the inability to be able to really talk with other peers or interact with them. So then writing little stories or doing stuff to kind of keep my mind occupied was really important.
Sure.
Both my parents were, my father was really old. He was 60 when I was born. My mom was 35. My mom, however, never learned to drive. So with those two factors, they didn't really like going into town a whole lot to drop me off for however long and then come back and pick me up.
Sure.
So I was pretty much isolated to just friends during school time.
Okay. And there, in that little community with those mobile homes, you didn't have any other friends there. It was all families with no children.
Yeah, a lot of them were older families, retired, or families with no children. Or if there was one young man that was, boy, that lived down the road, but we were so different that we just never, he had older brothers that he would hang out with, and that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
So, so that kind of isolation, I think, set up part of that childhood sexual abuse, just that isolation.
Yeah.
School also played a really good role. I think for me, school was my safe haven. I was never a troublemaker. I kind of stayed under the radar for the most part. School kept my mind occupied so I could do stuff. I don't ever consider myself really smart, just very hardworking. And then whatever intelligence resulted from that, that's what happened. But I could always rely on school. I could go there and I'd be there for a long time, and I'd have engagement. I'd have places or people to talk with, places to be at, things to do. And I think, and I may be biased, but I think my education from Moreland was very top-notch. I had great teachers who knew a lot, experienced a lot, were able to communicate that to me all through elementary school, junior high, and high school. So I really feel like the education was really good, and that also helped me to find a place, to find some place to be, some place to fit in. Because what was going on that I wasn't aware of as a young child is all of these, childhood social interactions were taking place. They would also be reinforced outside of school, and I never had that. So when I would try to come into something, just playing tag with other people, I didn't always feel like I fit in quite well enough, because the kids would play tag with it, and we'd stop and they'd talk about what they did. You know, they went hunting that weekend, or they went fishing that weekend, or they spent time with this other family. And those were things I could never get involved with.
So they had all these social activities that they were doing, and things outside of school that they were doing with their families and other friends, and you didn't have that in the same way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's another one of those things that could fall under isolation, but also, you know, I could be isolated, but I could still figure things out socially, you know, but that wasn't happening for me either. So again, one of those things that kind of set the stage for that. I think another thing that set the stage is that I matured really fast in junior high. By the time I was 13, I was 5'10".
Okay.
And so I towered over a lot of kids. I was already 160 pounds. So, you know, I was big. I had a lot of adults mistaking me for 18 or older when I was 12 and 13. So, you know, that doesn't always happen to boys. It does sometimes. And I think having those physical attributes mature so quickly without my parents or anyone else saying, okay, this is what's happening in your life, it's okay.
You didn't have any guidance through all of that.
Exactly. That was really tough to try to, again, figure out all that stuff on my own.
Sure.
So, you know, when I met my perpetrator for my 8th grade year, he, and I'm not giving him an excuse, probably saw me as someone who was much older than I was.
Sure.
So, initially.
Okay.
So there was that.
Yeah.
And then, you know, psychologically kind of going through the figuring things out on my own and not having really the capacity to put it all together, because that's an adult skill.
Sure.
To be able to figure out, okay, this is how I can, you know, manipulate or figure out this particular social interaction and do it well and fit in and be normal. I didn't have those things. So I was constantly looking for older people to kind of guide me through that. My dad was, I don't want to say he was too old, he was too old to really figure that out. And I think at that point, he was kind of worn out of just, you know, okay, I fathered you, that's all I can do. You know? Because I have a younger brother too. And so I think at that point, he just was tired. And my mother also had undiagnosed bipolarism. And so there was that aspect of, okay, I don't have someone who's very stable that guides me through this. So always looking for someone outside to, in my understanding at the time, just be there and just be a role model. And so a lot of that fell on men who were my teachers. Like I remember my 8th grade algebra teacher, who I've written letters to a couple times just thanking him for the things he did. He has no idea what kind of impact he had on me at that point, because I mean, this was a strong male figure who, you know, was caring, compassion. I mean, he just had it all together. And so to look at that was like, okay, that's what I needed in my life at that time.
And that's a good word for teachers that are right now that are hearing this. You have no idea the impact you're making on a child's life, that where they're coming from, things that they've not shared, and your leadership and your instruction and care into their life might be a life-changing thing for them that you will never hear about. So I wish that teachers could get more things for that, but you know, sometimes it's years down the line that they may hear about it. Sometimes they may never hear about it, but they're never forgotten in that sense. So so it's a good encouraging word for those who are teaching.
I hope it is, because it truly is that this man probably will never know, unless he hears this or sees my name published, know what I went through, and that he actually had a positive impact in that. But there were other teachers too. My 7th grade PE teacher, or my 6th grade PE teacher, was outstanding, and he just was a simple person. You know, so there's that lack of solid maleness that I just didn't have, that I think set me up to, okay, I'm looking for that in other people. And so being 13, I'm gonna find it somewhere. It's a necessity for a young child, so they're going to find it one way or another, whether in the positive places or in the negative places. They're going to find that acceptance and belonging. And unfortunately mine was in the negative, because my perpetrator lived in a trailer not that far from me. In order for me to get to where I wanted to walk around or explore or whatever, I would constantly pass his house. So when I started doing that as a on the regular in my 7th and 8th grade years. Of course, he would follow me, and he had his dogs, and we would meet and we would talk, and he really probably started off as maybe wanting to just, oh, well, this is a kid who seems alone, so we'll see. I don't know, but I think that's definitely one of the things that perpetrators look for, is that vulnerability,
Right.
And the seeking out of someone outside of the family. The
Makes them
isolation.
an easy prey in a sense.
Yeah. And that isolation too is another factor. So it all come together that summer of 1986.
Yeah.
And so he would, walk with me, talk with me. We would talk about just the normal things. And this whole process, for those people who aren't familiar, is in the survivors community is called grooming. And I'm sure people have heard of that.
Sure.
That, perpetrators find young men, women that they can befriend and get trust in, and slowly, little by little, they are able to gain that particular trust until that first physical sexual activity, which could be a variety of things.
Sure.
Not at this point, but anyway, so I'll go into details if that warrants it. But so during that time, I really was like, wow, I have someone who's older, he's interested in my life, I sought to hang out with him. So I was going after that relationship, and he saw that and then took advantage of that. He saw that the opportunity was right, and he said, okay, this is going to be the thing. And there was a Saturday afternoon that it happened where he fondled me and we had intercourse. And so that was the sexual act that from that point really changed the course of my entire life.
Yeah.
And so the first book is really a fictionalized story about that particular summer, and going through that and through those experiences, and then just a little bit of the feelings afterwards. The second one kind of explores more of the feelings, the brokenness, the relationship issues, again, still the need to connect, still having all those things that were there before, but now they're magnified.
It takes on kind of the aftermath.
And
of abuse.
Unfortunately now they're sexualized. So everything, that isolation is now sexualized, and the need to have a male figurehead, even though it's not something that I may want to do or other survivors may want to do, but it's sexualized. And so people go different ways, and obviously we can get into what that means.
Sure.
But so there's a lot that's in that.
Now, what was your relationship like with your parents through all of this?
So they had no idea until...
Were they highly involved in your life?
No.
Okay.
No. And I can remember from a young age where, sometimes you'd have to take home homework and get it signed by your parents, and they would go through your math and say, okay, have your parents go through this with you. I went through it on my own and said, here, sign. And then they would, and then I'd take it back. And
So
that was
they
pretty
didn't
much...
even bother to read through it.
They didn't even bother, no. They're
tell me what I got to do, and then you go. And
yeah, we trust that you know what you're doing, because again, school was my priority, and so that was that. They were not involved a whole lot in my life, and I don't think they ever figured anything was wrong. With me seeing this guy, going out there, spending time with him, and then all of a sudden it stops, and I don't even know if they knew.
Yeah, they never and it never registered that.
Yeah.
Wow. And trying to not give away all of your book and your story. So, I want people to get your book and read your story and read about that. But the aftermath of that, I mean, because you've talked about the things that lead up to this, the personal situations in life, the family situations, just the growing up as a young man and the needs that a young man has for companionship, for leadership, not just any leadership, but specifically male leadership. It's a very important thing that in our culture is missing in a lot of ways today. Let's jump ahead to this. I'm with your boys. How has that affected your parenting your boys?
That's a good question, because I have 3 boys that are 2 years apart. The very first time I realized how overprotective and protective I was I was in a La Habra Target. My wife was grabbing something from an aisle. I was turned away from Jason, my oldest, just for a minute. I turned back to see a guy just go by him and rub his head. No, nothing more. But that enraged me that someone could take that opportunity, as small as it was, to even touch my child. Even
How old was he at this time?
Oh, he was probably 14 months, 16 months.
Okay,
so
so a little
not
baby.
even,
Okay.
yeah, not walking. So
Yeah.
he was in the, in the cart, but old enough to be able to sit up and, you know, all of that. And he was a cute kid, and he was blonde, and we were in, a place where there's not a lot of blonde kids. So I'm sure it was like, oh, this is a cute kid,
Yeah.
But something as innocent as that, now in my mind, is not, and will never be innocent. So, so there was that. And then as they got older, I was there more as a observer when we were out in public places, at soccer, at basketball, at football, at baseball, whatever sports they were involved with, just an observer, to make sure that they were okay. And things went great. There was no issues, but there was always that little piece in me that was like, I just can't let that happen to them.
Right. Not on my watch. I'm not going to allow them to go through the same things I went through.
And not even when I'm not looking either. Not just on not my watch, but my watch is 24/7.
Sure.
But 13, when my oldest hit 13, which was the age that I was sexually abused, that was a very tough time, and kind of a turning point too, because I realized that at 13, I couldn't make adult decisions, and I was not responsible for the sexual abuse that happened to me. Because of it in therapy, it was a lot of, okay, it's not your fault, yeah.
Right.
Okay, but at 13, when we self-perceive that, we're like, but I was 13. I should have known.
Sure,
now
I was wise enough to know certain things.
Yeah, but you're still looking back at that saying, but I was 13, I knew this. But that's not the case. When you see your child at 13, you're like, no, there's no possible way that I could have consented, wanted, asked for, any of those kinds of things. I was a victim, 100%.
Sure.
So in that respect, it was helpful to realize, okay, I can accept that. And then when my middle hit 13, it was more acceptance. And when my youngest hit 13, the same thing, just reinforcement of that.
Yeah.
And so watching them grow up and realizing, that was good. But it was also agonizing too, that, okay, here they're at the age where I was, and being more diligent and worrying more, and really internalizing that. Because there isn't a lot of other parents who share that same experience as I do. So it does become a lot more. And I know we'll touch on spouses later, but I talk to my wife about these things, but still the sympathetic ideas that are behind that are still hard, unless you have a parent who's in the same role.
Absolutely.
And it was, gosh, I'm gonna forget the date, but my three boys knew. We sat down and had a discussion about my own sexual abuse with them, and it was nice, because here they are, we're all at the dinner table, and I'm telling them what happened, not the details, and it became this discussion about how our family has always been strong in Christ, and always really supported one another and been there for each other, and saw each other through tough times. And so it was a totally different conversation than I was expecting. And thank the Lord that none of my kids said, oh yeah, guess what, it happened to me on a church thing or whatever. None of that happened. So that was really good. And so my boys have been very supportive. Although they've struggled a little bit, they're like, I can't read the book, Dad, because that's you, and I just see you, and I'm like, that's fine. You do not have to read the book.
That would be hard to read about your dad and the struggles that they went through in those areas. So.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that.
So. Absolutely. Now, back to your story. After high school, did your perpetrator move away? How did you separate in that sense?
So the first thing that happened was that there was just this great deal of anger after the first incident, and I really just kind of wiped out that whole environment, and it was just at home or at school. That was it. It was the only two places. And so when I said I gotta get out there because it just was itching. I couldn't stay inside anymore.
Sure.
There was one contact where I made sure I yelled at him and said, you know, I've got a girlfriend. All these lies about, you know, all this stuff that I don't want nothing to do with you. And it was very clear. So that was pretty much it on that respect. And then he did move away. He moved to way across country, New Jersey, I believe it was. And so I really was never to see him again.
Okay.
However, he did come back, called me up and said, hey, do you want to just go hang out in the Badlands for a little bit? And I'm like,
How long after?
I was 16 at that time.
Okay, so a couple years later.
Yeah.
Okay.
And at 16, I was in therapy because depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts were just constant. And I still had not yet found that person who was going to save my life, you know,
Right.
and take me, you know, that male figure who was just going to correct everything and make it all right. So I'm like, well, I'm 16, I'm bigger, nothing's going to happen. And that was not the case at all. It happened one more time. And this was something where it was still the same coercion, but again, it was kind of an out of body experience where I really did separate my whatever physical stuff was going on and really just was not there, not present. So a lot of survivors will talk about that when there's multiple encounters
Yeah.
or multiple abuses, or someone living who is an abuser with
Yeah.
them, which is
Yeah.
actually more of the case
Right.
than mine. So there was that experience, and then that was the last one. So during high school, I just got progressively more unstable, probably is a good way to describe it. I would throw myself into school and stress over school, and I'm like, I've got to get these good grades because I got to get out of this town.
Yeah.
I'm sick of living in, you know, where everybody knows everybody else's business, all the small town stereotypes you can think of.
Did people in town know
No,
what had happened?
no
Okay.
idea. Yeah.
Okay.
But there's always this fear that you walk into a room and it's the scarlet letter on you that it's like, oh, well, we know what you did. You know?
Right.
Because how in the world would someone who didn't know me know that I would be susceptible to that?
Yeah.
So again,
Sure.
my prefrontal cortex logic, you know, is not working really well. So I'm thinking they're going to know. You know?
Right.
So I just continued to get depressed, continued to have some suicidal thoughts, started cutting also, because with most males who undergo this, cutting isn't a huge thing, or at least it wasn't a huge thing. It was that's more of a female attribute. They're more likely to have explosive, violent eruptions where they're destroying other things. So
Sure.
that's their self-harm.
Kind of the testosterone outbreak. in that sense.
Much more than that.
Yeah.
And then there's also the hypersexuality. So men will go out and they will just sleep with every girl that they can because they want to mask whatever homosexual things that they feel are upon them. And then there's also the constant working out. There's a little bit of a body image issue where, okay, I've got to look better, I've got to be bigger so no one else hurts me. And it may be that's not what they're thinking, but they end up doing like the really violent sports, not just football, because I mean football's violent,
Sure.
but I mean those extreme things like martial arts
Right.
and
They want to hurt somebody.
they want to hurt somebody
Sure.
and they don't mind getting hurt because
Right.
that's the whole
They can take the
process
pain
of
because it
self-harm.
masks the pain from their abuse.
Yeah, and it puts it somewhere else, and it is temporary relief. It is a coping mechanism, but it's not a good one.
Right.
So-
Right. Now, do you know the statistics on male abuse versus female abuse, or in your?
They're reportedly, I don't know the female as much. I want to say females are 1 in 4.
Okay.
For males, it's 1 in 6.
Okay.
But those statistics are what are reported.
Sure.
So obviously, there's going to be, you know, it's definitely less than 1 in 6.
Yeah.
Probably more like 1 in 2 for females and 1 in 4 for males.
Wow.
But yeah, 1 in 6 is a common phrase in the survivor community,
Okay.
because that is the statistic that of reported cases.
Wow. Yeah. Amazing. And then, so you were able to get out of town.
Yes. Yeah. So all my hard work, I ended up being
paid
the
off.
salutatorian of my class. Got some good scholarships, and every school I applied to was far, far away from Wyoming. And so I chose Whittier College, only because they gave me the most money.
Okay, all right. Hey,
It's like, I've got to
That
pay
works.
for college myself. I'm going to make sure I
that's
get it.
that's a good priority there.
Yeah, and all through this time, I had no knowledge of Christ. I was not a believer, but I was definitely seeking in lots of different areas. I remember my mom signed me up for vacation Bible school once. I think mostly just to get me out of the house.
Right.
You know, not for any real spiritual purpose.
Sure, give you somewhere to go.
Yeah, somewhere to go and out of her hair for a while.
There you go.
So there was that. And I occasionally went to church with some friends in high school who were believers and who had very strong, very conservative beliefs. One that, no music in church, so that was a lot.
Okay.
For
It was
me, anyway.
legalistic.
Yeah, much more so. So odd for me, but I still went, and because I wanted to be with my friends.
Sure.
And then at 16 also, I was like, I've got to find something, because there was something inside of me that just was really seeking out not just a male figure, but also God. Really just wanting to understand more of, okay, what is my life's purpose, and why did all of this happen? But how can I erase it?
Right.
Can I go to God and it just all go away? That was a strong pull. And so, being studious and having not a whole lot to do during summers, I researched a lot of different religions, from Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam, and some of those were like, nope, not going to do that one, not going to do that one. Looking at some of the Christian religions or denominations, and realizing, no, I'm not going to do that one, that one's too much. But finding a Greek Orthodox church in our town and realizing that might be fun, might be interesting.
Be fun.
Yeah, I'm like, okay.
I've never heard anybody put it that way.
Yeah, especially if you've
Greek
been to an
Orthodox, that might be
Orthodox
fun.
church. That might be fun.
I thought I was unique in thinking the Orthodox were fun.
No, I really did.
All right.
And so, I looked into that, and we did have a little small parish in our town with very few Greek families. The priest actually would only come once a month to do a service from Casper, Wyoming, which is a 3-hour drive away.
Wow.
So I started attending there my junior year of high school and loved it. And just, I think the biggest draw for me was that I could leave everything at the door and enter into the presence of Christ in that particular church, because it was the icons, the iconostasis, everything about it was not of this
You were
world.
surrounded by remembrances, and it was able to use lack of a better word, to distract you from everything else.
Yeah.
And so you had visual stimulation, you had auditory stimulation, you
Exactly.
had smells and sights and sounds and everything else that would allow you to leave your problems at the door and then enter a whole new world, if you will.
And that world really didn't include being sexually abused, and that's exactly what I was looking for. I got to erase every time I came through the door that part of me, and that was a huge draw. And so almost immediately I decided I want to do this. I want to become Greek Orthodox. So because the priests only came every so often, by the time I graduated, there wasn't time enough to really go through the whole process. So when I got to Whittier, I figured there's got to be churches here.
You're in Southern California.
Yeah, there's got to be something.
A whole plethora.
One church I went to was a Serbian Orthodox church, I believe, in Montebello, and they were closed. But then I kind of went through the phone book and found one in La Habra that, again, was a parish. It was an actual church, but had a deacon that would be there. And so every Saturday we'd have a service, and then Sunday morning we'd have the liturgy. So I started going there, and then became chrismated in the Orthodox Church.
Okay.
So my chrismation name is Alexander. So one more name to add
Hey,
to
there
the
you go.
list.
Harry Alexander Estes.
Yeah. Junior.
Junior. Oh, good Lord. Amazing. Okay.
Yeah. So and I really do believe I can pinpoint a time, not a moment, but like a time frame where I'm like, I really believe in the Bible. It was right before finding the Orthodox Church. I'm like, you know what? I've heard of all these things that the Bible says, and I was taken to a Church of Christ center in LA, and that turned me off but I'm like, I'm gonna really figure out what this is. So I got a Bible, got involved in a Christian fellowship group, mainly because of my wife.
She wasn't your wife at the time?
Not at the time.
Okay,
No,
yeah.
just a girl I was interested
Yes.
in. And then really just started with Genesis and going through it. I'm like, oh, I remember some of these things from Vacation Bible School, and then got into the church. And so over that short time frame, I really realized, and I can remember a passage that I had written in a journal, talking about the Church of Christ. If that's what it means to be a Christian, I am not going to do it because I want to follow what the Bible really says. So there was this sense of the answer's got to be here.
Yeah.
And that didn't come from the Christian Fellowship group. It didn't come from, anybody telling me that, but it really was one of those spiritual interventions that said, this is where you're going to find your answer.
Yeah.
And again, I know lots of people become Christians in a moment, but I do feel like that was part of it, but there was this development that happened over months of...
It was more of a process for you in that sense.
Definitely, because then there was the understanding of the Old Testament, and then realizing, gosh, Numbers is awful. Am I ever going to get through this?
How do I read through this book?
Yeah, and sorry, Jews. But,
I think many of them struggle with that too.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. But then getting to the New Testament and seeing, and hearing about that, and then being involved in our Christian fellowship that we had, and going to prayer groups, and really being observant and watching and what other guys were doing. And then they kind of became not the mentors I was thinking of, but mentors in a way that really helped me realize what a Christian life involves. What are some foundations that you can have, and then building upon those foundations. So so that's that part of the story.
Yeah. And what were some of the struggles that you found? And because moving away, I think, I would imagine that you felt that you were getting away from your past. That if I could move somewhere else and start over again, then I could, just erase the past, create a new life, and move forward from that.
Yeah, that's always good in theory, but I find it never really happens. Because you're always bringing part of you with you wherever you go. And so trying to bury those things that are good or bad just are not going to work, because they're going to surface. And so I think my freshman year, the biggest thing was, wow, there's this Los Angeles out there that I can go and explore and find stuff. And so I was good at that.
I think from a small town, that was probably amazing that you've got this big city now to live in and explore.
And then really find things. And I got a job working with developmentally disabled students, and so I would go to their house, I would play with them, watch them, whatever was required, and that got me to know East San Gabriel Valley, Pasadena area, tons of different places. And so I found places again to explore and find myself and find other things. And so I knew this area even better than my wife, who grew up here.
You're seeing areas that she's never seen before. Probably.
Or being able to say, oh, you just go down the 57 and it cuts into makes the 210, and she's like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
You're gonna have to draw me a map. There was no GPS at that time.
Exactly. Only the Thomas guides.
There you go. Dating ourselves now.
Yep.
So what were some of the challenges that you found when you thought you were going to leave it all behind, and forming relationships in college, because you're in a new place where you didn't know anybody? You had to form all new relationships. You got to create your own identity. And what were some of what was that like? What were some of the challenges and the victories that you found in that?
I think one of the biggest challenges was that I had a whole bunch of background knowledge that was very different than the background knowledge of people that grew up here. And so trying to relate to some of those things was difficult, and then vice versa. My sophomore year roommate grew up here, had no idea what an ice scraper was. When he pulled it out of my car, he was like, what is this?
I thought it was a weapon or something.
Yeah, something as simple as this. And then when I told him what it was before, he couldn't believe that it actually happened, that you could get ice on your windshield. So those kinds of things, and being able to balance, okay, here's my life in California, but I still have my parents and my brothers and some friends back in Wyoming. Going back and forth just never seemed to really kind of fit either at that point.
Okay.
I didn't fit in Wyoming anymore.
Right.
Because I lived in California now, even if it had only been a week.
Yeah.
And I still hadn't figured out everything in California yet. And so not having some of that background knowledge too, again, was, well, how do I socialize? What do I do? What's acceptable? What's not acceptable? Because normally in my town, if we were to spend a Friday night, we'd drive up and down Main Street and talk and listen to music. Well, you don't do that here in California.
Not as much.
No. So those were some adjustments.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest one in the relationship is that I still carried that I want to find someone who can meet those best friendship needs that I never was able to have. And so it was that constant search. Okay, could this person be a good friend? Could this person be a good friend? And then once it finally came out that, yeah, I'd been abused, I'd been sexually abused, who can I trust with this information?
Yeah.
And who can I trust that they're going to understand me and still accept me?
Right.
So there was a lot of trial by error, thinking, okay, here's the person that might be that really, really good friend that I can totally trust in and be okay and grow myself with that person. But then realizing that's an expectation that's pretty big, because I'm carrying 18, 19, 20 years of lifetime of expectations and hoping that that's going to happen in 2 or 3 months.
Right.
So that by the time it's the end of the college year, that's more well established.
Right.
So there was very realistic expectations I put on people in college throughout, whether I was a freshman or a senior. So, and you included.
Well,
you can edit this out if you want to, because it's more personal. But yeah.
Well, I can imagine that too. That everybody in college is working through their personal issues as well, and so you've got a whole bunch of people becoming their own people, and working through their own childhood issues to varying extents and degrees, and some more challenging than others, and so on. But to look for an individual that's going to meet that need, and then to constantly be fearful of exposing yourself and making yourself vulnerable to them, for them to hurt you, that's got to be a challenge to build healthy relationships and all.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it really is.
And then the fear of being rejected, the fear of being
left is more so than anything else. Is that I found that in our Christian community at Whittier, people were very accepting. When I came out and said, this is what happened to me, people surrounded me, and it was really good. But then what I feared most is, okay, they're gonna see all of that stuff, all that brokenness, all of those issues that I have, and they'll be like, whoa, this is way too much, I can't deal with it, I'm out. Yeah. And that's even probably more hurtful than an initial, you know what, I hear your story, but I just can't do that.
Right.
Let's not even start any kind of friendship or relationship.
Because you're not attached to that person now.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's
the moment you start forming any attachment, then
then
that's where the separation hurts more.
And I think for myself, and maybe this is for a lot of other people, there's a codependency factor with other people that, oh God, I gotta form these relationships, and I gotta form them fast, and I gotta form them solid, and I gotta do all this because I've only got this much time to be able to do this, because there's just a time limit, and there's this anxiety, and that doesn't form good friendships or relationships at all.
Yeah. I know in your book you were talking a lot about the desire to fit in, and you found yours in the classroom. Yeah. And your intellectual pursuits and your hard work in those avenues gave you respect and value in the eyes of others. Maybe that's what you were seeking a lot, was to be validated as a person and as someone who contributes and has something valuable for others. Yeah. And did college change that in you at all? Were you still seeking that in college, or was it kind of you know that was a high school thing and then you moved on to different aspects of relationships as you got into college?
I think that there's a continuum of what you're saying, that in high school, it was really important to work hard and get straight A's and do all of those things and get scholarships and win contests and all of that. Because that's where I could at least find some normalcy and say, okay, I can do this. You know, I maybe can't throw a football, but I can do this. I can write an essay. That didn't necessarily change in college, but I think looking back, high schoolers, including myself, were not able to really verbalize that kind of expectation.
Sure.
Like, oh yeah, you're really smart, you're really good, you know, you do all this stuff.
Yeah.
Here's the praise and
that
adoration
wasn't
you're looking
the cool
for.
thing in high school either so much. The
Not
smart kid is never the cool kid. You
Not
know?
necessarily, but that's where I think maybe
people value different things.
Yeah, but that's where I think maybe high school was a little bit different and a little bit better, because they really did value those kids who were smart. Because a lot of times those kids who were smart were also in athletics and did well in athletics. Our quarterback of our football team played in the band.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of value with being able to do
Throw
those
off the
things.
shoulder pads and pick up his trombone and go out at halftime.
Somewhat, yeah. Although at football season he didn't, but then, you know, during other times,
Sure.
as much as he could, he did.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think, okay, my school was a little bit different. We didn't quite have those clicks because, well, what else was there to do? You know, you could play football and then, well, that's it.
When season's over, you got to do something else.
Yeah. And so being in the band or being in multiple sports and also achieving well in school was good. So our 3 valedictorians that we had were all involved in multiple sports. And did very well. So
good deal. Well, how about let's talk about your wife.
Okay.
When you met her, what was that like? What was it? I don't know how to phrase that well. What?
Well, I think if you're thinking of in terms of being a survivor, okay, so she didn't know when we met. But one coping strategy I think survivors do really well is that they box things in their lives.
Okay.
So that this, you know, especially a survivor who the perpetrator is a parent or a family member, because at home this is that box and I don't ever open it outside of there. So at school, this is my box here. So I did that pretty well too. So when I met Chrissy, my box of sexual abuse was put away because I'm in California. I'm trying to do well in classes because I want to go on to graduate school, blah blah blah. Finish my future. So that one was closed. So meeting her, it was very different than I think, because I didn't grow up with her. In high school, all the girls that were in high school, I knew them all because they were all in junior high, and a third of them were in my elementary school. So there was a lot of background for that. So it was a little bit odd to meet someone who we didn't have any of that, but then it was also exciting because it's like, well, she doesn't really know me that well, and so let's give it a shot. But again, I was just so immature and not ready for relationships because I really didn't know what women wanted. I didn't really know what I wanted. So we dated off and on for a couple of years before we really settled on becoming a couple and engaged my senior year, beginning of my senior year. And so she was one of the first group there that when I finally broke down and said this is what happened. So from the beginning time when I was admitting it, she was there up until until now. So she's heard the story, she knows the feelings, she can kind of predict behaviors now.
She understands a lot more of where you're coming from.
A lot more.
Knows what to expect.
And there's a lot of power in that. A lot of power that I've been able to give over to her and say, I'm going to trust you in this. And, you know.
But was that some of the biggest challenges in forming a relationship with her, was entrusting her with those things and being vulnerable to her and allowing her in, knowing that she could have that power to hurt in that sense, if you will? Or?
I think sometimes when a survivor does finally admit, I'm going to put my trust in you, at least for myself, I threw the rest of it out. It's like, okay, she's not going to hurt me. She's not going to hurt me. She's not going to use any of this against me. And I think you get to that point over years and years of back and forth silence to yes, I'm sorry, to back to some silence to okay, now we're okay, you know, this cycle of emotions that I think a survivor goes through trying to figure out, am I going to be independent because my independence keeps me from being hurt, or am I going to be healthily dependent, which means I'm going to communicate and I'm going to share and I'm going to talk and I'm going to comfort and I'm going to, reciprocate
The give and take.
the give and take of a relationship.
Yeah.
And that was very tough because I was very much more, everyone else is important but me at this point. So I gotta make sure she's okay, this is okay. If she doesn't feel like something is right, that's fine, I'm out. Because I don't want to disrupt her life. And I think a lot of our, dating on and off was, me, I probably could have pursued her more. And then maybe that would have formed a more long-lasting relationship. But I didn't, because I didn't know how to do that.
Right.
I still don't know how to do it. So
no man does.
but I'm better than I was when I was 19.
We make it up as we go.
yeah, totally. But that's an aspect of relationships that's just really hard.
Yes, yeah. And having that background was now premarital intimacy. Not necessarily sexual intimacy, but being that, personally intimate, giving your heart to another person in that way. Was that difficult to do?
Very difficult to do because even though I was a new person in Christ at that moment, my behavior patterns hadn't really changed much. My instinctual behavior patterns of everything is now sexualized doesn't change much.
Right.
So to be intimate meant to have sex.
Sure.
There was no in between for that.
It wasn't the emotional connection or the personal connection that you have with the person. It was a physical connection that spoke intimacy to you.
Right. And so if we were going to do what Christian couples normally do and refrain from sex until marriage, that means most every intimate part of that relationship also has to stop too. That was very difficult for my wife at the time when she wasn't my wife, because that was, for her to find value in a relationship is me praising her and encouraging her and really giving my heart to her in intimate, non-sexual ways. I just had no idea
How
what
do you
that
do
was.
that?
That wasn't even on my radar. That was one of those things you don't even know you are supposed to know.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
oh, well, we just go and we date and we get married and then we have sex and then everything else falls into place, right?
Right.
So
well, every young man is trying to navigate that for themselves too, and then you throw in the background of abuse, and that just makes it that much more complicated and difficult.
And it was very complicated because it was very black and white.
Yeah.
That no, not at all until we get married.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think that's one of the challenges of people that have friendships, have relationships with the survivor. They want to help, but I think oftentimes don't know how.
Yeah.
And so boundary setting, being a good listener, being patient, being encouraging,
and just helping them feel normal.
yeah, not pointing it out, not kid gloving it in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the most valuable things that really helped me is I have a friend from the old church we used to go to, and he's really super handy. He drives a motorcycle. Everything is just he just exudes macho. Best kind of affirmation I got from him is that he helped me to fix a toilet and was patient. He showed me how to do it, and then he let me do it, and then I did it, and I felt great about myself.
Sure.
And that, those kinds of things can be really helpful. So a lot of survivors, they may be really handy, they may not, but they're going to be deficient in something. And if they can, help them out in some way where you really validate what they do through that can be really helpful too.
Yeah.
So.
You're investing in them in a sense, and giving them that new skill, that new sense of accomplishment.
Whatever area it may be.
Yeah, that's great. Now as a church, this is a topic that churches don't address very often. We've seen it come up in the news. When we do hear about it, it's always an after effect kind of a thing. There's perhaps precautions that need to be put in place, not perhaps, but yes. There are many churches out there with those in place, which are very good, but it's obviously been an issue because you have trusted figures that win over young men, young women, and then they take advantage of that role and that position. And so as the church, what can the congregations do? I mean, because obviously coming together, maybe it fits into what we've been talking about here of just the belonging, you know. Are there things that you've seen or that you can think of that in the church setting, the church as a whole can do better with in these issues?
The biggest thing is that to understand you can't necessarily invite a survivor right into church because they're going to be very untrusting to begin with. And again, it's from that same reason that you said they're coming from a background where maybe they were abused because of a church member. So that's the last thing that they're going to want to do.
Sure.
However, investing in a relationship one-on-one is a great way to get that started. So that's really not any different than any ministry in a sense, is starting with that, you know, personal relationship and really not talking so much about God and what God can do for them yet, but really just getting them to talk about their experience and making them feel normal and making them feel like, okay, you're not a victim, but what happened to you was wrong, was, you know, reprehensible, all of that, and now let's move forward and then start introducing Christ and how, you know, and again, I think through personal experiences work the best, where it's like, this is how Christ has affected me, this is what Christ has done for me, and leave it at that. Let them come up with their own conclusions based upon those things.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's like a lot of these ministries that you have to have the relationship to really introduce Christ to them, regardless of their background. That you know, we always have that saying that they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Right.
And so for anybody, and perhaps even more a abuse survivor, they need to feel a part of things. They need to know you're genuinely looking for their interest and you're genuinely compassionate and interested in their good in their life before they're going to open themselves up in a way.
Oh yeah.
Because there's a guard that's already set in place for them. So
yeah, exactly.
You're not winning their trust for your own benefit, but you, in a sense, you do have to win their trust and show them that you are genuinely concerned for their well-being and are interested in them as people.
Yeah, and that's really big because sometimes we don't necessarily feel like people. We feel like
statistics.
A statistic. We feel like a victim. We feel like someone else's thing.
Less than human.
That they use for whatever they need.
Yeah.
So that is definitely one thing. I think the church as a whole should not be afraid to talk about sexual issues, obviously appropriately to the different age levels.
Sure.
But one of the biggest things that I've noticed is that the stranger danger is really not the issue. It's the people in your own family.
Yeah.
In our group, except for maybe two, they've all been abused by a family member. And so that should hopefully become a bigger issue for the church, is how can we ensure that children are safe in their own home?
Right.
And I'm certainly not advocating, you know, go telling your, you know, people, but I think by opening those conversations up and talking about the issue more and not being afraid of, you know, talking about sex, because you don't have to talk about sex to talk about sexual abuse, because there's a whole bunch of other stuff that surrounds that. And so churches really can open up the floor to talk about grooming relationships, to talk about other kinds of abuse that can be involved in sexual abuse, can talk about pornography and the impact that has on men and women now growing in number. So there's all of those kinds of issues that are central to childhood sexual abuse that can be talked about too.
And the kids are being taught that in the public schools, and they're being taught it from a very different worldview and perspective, and encouraged in different ways than they would be in a church setting. So the approach to the subject is going to be very different based on where they're getting it from. And so for those that are allowing the public schools to be the sole source of information, they're going to get a very different view on sexuality and what is appropriate, what is biblical, what's right, what's acceptable.
And I think you can, you know, for students that are in the public school setting, when it comes to sexual abuse, I think we can feel safe enough to say, okay, you know, they're going to say certain things are wrong and you need to look out for this and you need to talk to people if these things happen. But I think it kind of stops there, and it's like, well, then what can the church do to help heal that? Okay. So once that is out, what are the steps that they can take, the church can take to help those who have been hurt and are struggling and have all these strings of issues. So that's where the church can really step in too. So I kind of see it as, how can we prevent it? And really by focusing on families and, family roles and strengths and, experiences and connection and community. And then how can we help when after it happens, recognizing that it does, not being afraid to talk about the sexual issues, not necessarily sex itself, but all of those things that surround it.
Now, let's end with some personal experience on your part about how you found healing. What are some of the,
am still
how you are
finding.
still? I'm sure it's an ongoing process, but what is it
process.
that was the big turning point for you, and what you talked about going to church and finding that escape and finding the one that met those needs that you were looking for. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how you found the measure of healing that you have found?
The biggest thing is to find an outlet for those emotions, and I think that's where the books came in. I don't think I would be as far as I am without having that outlet of expression of just writing it down and saying, okay, well, this may not be true, but I know it's an experience and I know it's a feeling. I'm going to write about it. So that's been a good outlet for me.
Being able to express yourself to someone in some way.
Even if it's to pen and paper or computer.
Artistically or whatever it is.
So finding some outlet to do that. If a person is alone and a survivor, they really need to find someone in the community that is a survivor too, because there's nothing like being able to feel more normal and fit in than sharing an experience and then having a person say, I went through the same thing, I understand what you're saying, or even stopping you and saying, I know exactly what you've just been through. Because there's a lot of people in our group that talk about things, and we can shorten what we say because we already know this. Everybody else has been through it.
You don't have to rehash it and relive it at this time.
And so finding that in community can be helpful. And then just therapy too, just being able to talk things out, being with someone that you really trust, has been really good in just helping me figure out stuff. And for me, what has worked the best is to have a person always engage me in inquiry, like, okay, so what does that mean? And what does that feel? And what does that do? And always having me kind of, circulate my emotions and work them out myself to help.
Learn how to feel your emotions.
And I'm still working on that.
Of course, it's a lifelong battle.
I can feel anger.
Sure.
I can be happy, but that's probably about it sometimes. And being sad and crying and empathetic sometimes is hard.
Well, is there anything else that you want to share? Any other thoughts? Anything we haven't hit on? Any final words of wisdom?
I think for survivors, I just pray that they don't feel alone, because they're not. And then for those of people listening that are not survivors, just be listening and watching. It's the best thing you can do.
Good stuff. Well, I know on your website, your website is Harry Estes.
Harry L. Estes.
Harry L. Estes.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see the L since
It
it's
is.
lowercase. .com,
HarryLEstes.com. We'll have a link to it on our website as well, so people can go there and read about your story, see your books, order your books there. We'll also have links to Amazon where they can order your books. But I know you've got some links to some agencies and organizations that provide help and offer. Are those? You want to mention those real quick for anybody that's looking?
A good resource that I found is malesurvivor.com. It's kind of formatted in lots of different ways, where there's resources and information, and then there's a whole community where there's different message boards and chat rooms where men can talk about a variety of issues. As far as being spiritual, there's not a whole lot there, but you can find people there who, because of their situation, have found Christ too. So you just got to be searching for it. But so that's one that I definitely recommend going in for. So.
And in their churches, they're obviously going to their pastoral staff, or
definitely
trusted elders, or
seek those people out, and don't be afraid to take the time to seek out the right person.
Yes. Absolutely. And we'll put, again, all the links on our website, so you'll have access to all of that. And if you are a survivor who is working through the healing. We do again encourage you to connect up with somebody. Send us a note and we will help you find someone. Go to harryestes.com and connect with Esty.
Yeah.
And he will connect with you personally or find someone to help you connect. And
on my website I do have a place where you can message me, and I have a blog that I try to keep up fairly regularly. So there's lots of different ways to.
So just know you're not alone if you are struggling through that, and there is hope, there is healing, there is a future, there is a healthy life to have. And lots of blessing to come from that, and lots of people that would be interested and willing to surround you with friendships that are healthy and love that is appropriate. So definitely reach out, take that step. And I know that's the hardest thing to do, first of all.
It is extremely difficult, yes.
The first expression can be the biggest hurdle. So once you overcome that, you can definitely do that. So,
and I'm working on book number 3, just so you know. So
excellent.
Look forward to that to come out soon.
Wonderful. Yeah, so I highly recommend anybody who's wants greater insight. If you are not a survivor, you've never experienced sexual abuse, this book will help you understand a little bit more, I think, about what people have gone through that have gone through sexual abuse, and hopefully give us a little more empathy and insight and the ability to understand at least a little bit as best we can of what that experience is like. And for those that have experienced it, you can hopefully make a connection here and be able to continue healing, continue that growth and development. So, well, thank you for being here.
You're welcome, Mike. Thank you for having me.
It's been so great. We'll look forward to the 3rd one coming out, and we'll come back and talk about that.
All right, that sounds good.
And next time we'll talk about other stuff too. We'll talk about family and ministry and what else you got going on.
Okay, excellent.
Well, thanks.